This is NDTV, and you're watching NDTV Prime.
Hello and welcome. The last few weeks for India's startups and entrepreneurs have been what many would describe as perhaps forgettable. The headlines have been around issues they would want to forget or at least hope don't play out for the rest of the year. These include layoffs, companies shutting down, founders arrested, and of course sexual harassment claims as well. Just what is going on? Is it just part of evolution of a space that is so celebrated in the country, or at least was till very recently, or are there serious issues that need to be addressed? And if the latter is true, are they being addressed or brushed under the carpet? That's what we're looking at today. Let me introduce my panel to you right away. Nitin Saluja, founder Chayos, a chai chain cafe, is with us, as is Raghav Chandra, co-founder Urbanclap, a mobile marketplace for local services. Shruti Gupta, co-founder Amil, a lifestyle luxury portal, someone who is now an entrepreneur and has worked for other entrepreneurs as well. Ravindra Krishnappa, an ex-angel investor, he's invested in Stazilla among other companies, and an entrepreneur again also with us. Thanks all so much for your time. Nitin, because you're a straight talker, I'm going to start right off with you. Like I said in my introduction, you know, the last couple of weeks have shown that there are all sorts of issues that perhaps most companies would face, but this is a relatively new and younger space that India's entrepreneurs are now occupying. To those who are asking, what's going on? What would you say?
I think, as you very rightly said, it's just a part of the evolution. Things, so you look at countries, economies, whatever, everything goes through cycles, goes through evolution, and that's what's happening with some startups out there as well. They will evolve, they will learn from their mistakes. There will be certain things where startups will be, for no fault of theirs, be exposed to something 2 times when they have to face the brunt of it. It's just a part of the evolution. It'll leave a lot of learnings with it, and people will mature with it, and the time to come is going to be beautiful as always.
That's wonderfully optimistic. Raghav, to those who are saying that, you know, is enough being done? Let us just take a look, because, and I'll start with the cases of sexual harassment because they are most recent, but not for us to sit on judgment, of course, on anything that's happening out there. But for those who say that women are only comprising, say, roughly 5% of India's startup workforce at present. Are women safe? Are startups in a position to sort of make sure that women's safety is a priority for them?
I would go ahead and generalize it. I think this is a awakening call for the whole social ecosystem as a whole. Startups are coming under the limelight, which is great. Awareness is great. But yes, a lot needs to be done overall with the issues of gender equality. Startups, are they equipped? Are they not equipped? I think it's going to be a learning phase. It will take time. But gender harassment, these are not particularly issues just to do with startups. I think if we went deeper into the non-startup world also, we would find equally disturbing instances.
Sure. I think what happens here is that, like I said, that when, you know, a space is so celebrated and talked about and a push comes from the very top, from the Prime Minister, then if there are headlines which are sort of not flattering, then the focus just sort of stays on it more. Shruti, how do you sort of weigh in on this whole issue of women's safety? It's not just women's safety, of course. We've seen the new maternity laws that are in place, the new maternity bill that's in place, and many are worried that are sort of going to back off and take it easy on hiring women, or, you know, how do you come in on that?
We can't put this this kind of misogyny and everything particularly on the startup space. This is something which is very common across the industry. So we need to work on something which is on a wider level instead of just pinpointing the startups over here. When we talk specifically about startups, I feel it attracts more liberal people. And when people
liberal
are over
how?
here, liberal in the sense of the way they think, the chances they take, and women especially when they join a startup, I feel that that it's got more chance if something like this happens to a woman working in a startup. There's a more probability that the women would come forward. More attention.
Of course, as a society, we are a society where majority of the cases go underreported or unreported, and that's not to do with startups alone. That's just India as a society, because we are not comfortable talking about these issues. We're still stuck in that log kya kahenge phase that we are. But Nitin, to all those who sort of are watching and saying that, what really is wrong? Let's not just look at only startups or only sexual harassment, but the headlines. This has been a tough time. It's been a tough 1.5 years. They're saying that the coming year is not going to be much easier either. To all those who are sort of watching, what are the kind of key lessons that they take away? And do you personally have any fears on how things are going?
I think at startups, we don't necessarily look for one particular gender. We are looking for certain skill sets. We are always too passionate about getting the right person on board, irrespective of the gender.
That's great to hear. So you're saying even with these new maternity laws, it's not like startups are going to sort of not hire a woman because they're going to have to give her 6 months paid maternity.
I would doubt it.
It's okay.
I would doubt it. All that we are concerned about is how efficient is the work output of this individual going to be, be it of whatever gender. We don't really care about it. To the second point, do startups or like enterprises in general need to do something about it? I think startups need to do more primarily for preventing sexual harassment, because people end up working longer hours than usual enterprises. People end up working much closely. So they need to invest. It is unfortunately one of the lower priorities of startups, because you are continuously trying to look at growth.
That's a good point. You're saying that it's perhaps something like a wake-up call. That this is what we need to do. It might have been on the back burner, but this is just not acceptable. And I guess once you have these laws in place, or once you have these rules in place within a company, then it sort of becomes a sort of no-go area, and the message out there is pretty clear. Also, Nitin, to your point, when you said that it's great to know that women won't be discriminated against when it comes to being hired, because there have been surveys recently which found as many as 48% of founders had said that they would think twice when it comes to hiring women, given this maternity thing. But I would imagine that, Raghav, it's the same for you.
Absolutely, right? It's all to do with performance. End of the day, age, gender hardly matter. It's to do with how.
Does it have anything to do with the fact that what stage the company is at of its growth before they can be comfortable with hiring women, or do you believe that this is across the board?
It is something across the board, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be, right? Like it's anyways really hard to find really smart talent who would benefit you and aligns. So it's all to do with performance. Coming to the overall point of ecosystem, I think policies and these things don't matter too much. It's really, we have to look at it from a point of a social change to some degree, right? It's really coaching our co-workers, coaching ourselves as to what's right, what's wrong, and evolving.
Sometimes strict rules just act as a deterrent, that this can happen to me, so a thought might cross my mind, but I will not act on it. Ravindra Krishnappa, come in at this stage. Now, we've looked at sexual harassment. The other, of course, in recent weeks has been the arrest of the Stazilla founder. It saw top startup founders rallying in. There were, of course, lessons learned there as well. There was much debate on just how much is too much. Is it okay for companies to fold up, not pay? What about bankruptcy laws, the point that Nitin made to me before this program? How do you see all of this that's happening?
Startups are not outside of the law of the land, right? So one of the things that I think we have to establish is that startups need to follow the same rule of the land that any established organization has to go. Part of the problem seems to be that in India as a social system, we like to classify people into heroes and zeros, or heroes and villains, and startup, because they have always been given that space of hero, because they are the Goliath they are the David and Goliath kind of a structure. They are the underdogs. They get to see the media visibility, and that correspondingly turns back on them.
Fair enough. I guess that we tend to do that to people. I don't know whether it's specific to India alone, but we tend to sort of pull people really high up, so when they fall, that fall is also just very hard and very, very steep. But Nitin, come in on that point. What was it about the arrest of this Stazilla founder that just got so many founders talking about it, putting their weight behind it? Is it as simple as this could happen to anybody tomorrow? Because there is, of course, another side to every story, including this one.
I think what you said is one part of the story. Yes, everybody thought that it could just be me, and thus there needs to be something that needs to be done from my side, from the ecosystem side about it. And secondly, people right from day one had some cues where this whole thing is coming from. And it did not seem at all right from day one an issue with a partner that would have some lines of fraud under it or something like that. It seemed like a partner payment issue, and which could have been dealt in a much better fashion. I think it was just all of those, like some bit of learning, some bit of empathy, some bit of we think it's not right, all of that coming together, which put all the ecosystem behind that whole case.
Raghav, one thing that's happened as a result of this is that I can tell you that media organizations like ours have been told that the focus has just been on the one side of it, the founders and the startups. But what about, given the state of just so many companies today, which perhaps to us really seem to be precarious, you would perhaps understand more. And if everyone starts defaulting, or there are lots of people who can't pay back, just what happens to others out there? If there is an other side, how do you sort of weigh in? How do is it possible to have a win-win on both sides?
So, I mean, looking at these examples, they really open up three issues, right? As you said, one issue is that of understanding the risk associated with what we call now startups. Right? They probably behave a little differently. They're younger ventures. There is a risk. Anyone associating with them would have to also accept those risks. Then there's a counter side to it, which is, okay, great, but startups aren't living outside the gambit of overall ecosystems of doing business. So there is a responsibility. And responsibility is in multiple ways, right? The culture which the startups create, the business models, their responsibility to other businesses they're interacting with. And the third issue is mostly to do with the ecosystem of maybe using unfair means to get your will across, maybe a very Indian issue in terms of how business evolves and ethics around business and policies around it. But the win-win is really for everyone to understand all these and evolve in terms of maybe better policies coming in internally in startups or any organizations, socially or through policy, deterrence and more learnings happening. And overall ecosystem becoming more mature about how to handle younger ventures.
Do you think that we are on track on that? Do you think that that's happening? Do you think it's sort of been like a wake-up call for us to say that how do we deal with this? If this were me tomorrow in this position, what would I do? How would things be different? Because it seemed to have unsettled the space, hasn't it, Nitin?
True. It has definitely been so-called reminder, if not a wake-up call, that we need to be on the right side of the law always, and that's how it should always be. Krishnappa started very right that we are not outside the law, we cannot be, we should not be. So people are a little more cognizant of that fact now, and that's how it should stay. That's how it should stay. We should always be cognizant of our liabilities. We should always be cognizant of how far can we stretch our expenses.
Mr. Krishnappa, you want to come in?
It's not as though default does not happen outside of startups, right? And you would have heard lots of things. So there are cases where there has been reclaim. There have been cases where, obviously, as in my previous role as an investor, you are investing in the team and you're making sure that as far as any of these kinds of things, you're kind of making sure that everybody is paid off. In the last few weeks, I've been having conversations with a few VCs, and most of them, post this discussion, actually are thinking of creating a small corpus where they can actually go out and figure out if there are anything that they need to do as part of, as a pivot, a shutdown, etc. They want to go back and start to create a certain corpus that can be used to pay off any liabilities. It could be on the employee side, it could be on the vendor side, etc.
Okay. Just quickly, Mr. Krishnappa, one thing that came out of that entire debate then was also the role of investors and the pressure often put on founders. Who sort of takes the responsibility at the end of the day? What is the investor's role? Can they just cut and run? Does it all lie at the feet of the founders, who perhaps at some stage are desperate for the funds and willing to sign off for just about anything that the investors say? Is that a fair point to make?
No, that is not, because no investor would want to run an organization, right? So understand that the investor is in most cases betting on the founders to take it through. If they have lost confidence in the founder, then the first option or the first port of call is actually try and change the management team, but not come in and take over the operational decisions.
There's of course been these two cases. Then there's also been talk of all those companies shutting shop, layoffs, and just what is going on. Why some companies seem to be doing very well till 3 months ago, still making headlines about the millions that they are raising. Suddenly, to us at least, who are not tracking them on a day-to-day basis, seem that within weeks, and they suddenly shut shop. How do you sort of explain that to people out there who see these headlines, see these layoffs? And India as a society, unlike, say, America, unlike the West, is not comfortable with pink slips. We have not made our peace with it. It's not okay to get laid off. There's still, in our minds at least, there's some stigma with it.
So I feel.
So can I?
Yeah, okay, quickly.
Sorry,
yes, Mr. Krishnappa.
Yeah, so there are two aspects to this. One is what happens to the employee side of it, and then what is the founder side of it. So from an employee perspective, absolutely you need to protect as far as possible, because these are essentially high-performing people who are recruited, and in most cases, I wouldn't say in all cases, in most cases, they are recruited at a premium to the market because they know they're coming into a startup. There is the risk involved, but they're coming in for the learnings, for the energy level, etc. So there's a variety of things. Your point about nobody seems to know that they're going to fail and they're going to fail at the last moment. I think part of that is because one of the targets that some of the founders seem to have in their mind is, what is my next round of funding? How do I paint a picture that everything is hunky-dory? How am I kind of reaching out and creating incoming need for the next round of funding?
But in these times, of course, there's no saying when that next round of funding will come through, or if it will come through at all, Raghav.
No, true. I think it's a lot to do with timing. As founders in these risky ventures, you have to plan, you have to prepare yourself for when do you grow, when do you not grow, when do you stabilize. Right, but having said that, there's also the counter side to it, where these problems, the ideal picture is these never happen. The ideal picture is you always get the timing right, and you can always be a little more conservative, right? So I think this, going down to even the smaller instances, which often don't get talked about, overall in the last 1-2 years, with the whole funding rise, which happened before it slowed down, I think it gave rise to weaker business models. Overall layoffs and addressing these issues of what steps a company makes is a lot to do with, hey, the fundamentals of the company, have they been addressed correctly? Did they enter their growth phase too quickly? How are they doing on their balance sheets? And these are very internal issues for companies, for founders, for investors to analyze. I think that has evolved a lot because of this pushback and the slowdown, which is a good sign. I do hope it rallies back up.
Because you're saying that because in a tough time, perhaps it's time to just go back to the drawing board and go back to the basics a lot more. Shruti, would you agree?
I think that that it happens again in the traditional corporations as well, that there are layoffs and there are shutdowns. But again, the probability of them happening in a startup space is much higher because the risk is much higher.
Right.
So yes, we need to figure out that we really want to create value instead of just raising another round of funding.
But there are still, of course, who say that at the end of the day, the biggest problem is still about raising money. We did sort of an odd survey with people who come on to our shows, and most of them still talk about the biggest challenge being money. And it's my sense, rightly or wrongly, and of course I don't have a sense of the ecosystem like you guys do, it's still about show me the money, and that still takes priority. But do you believe that enough of that is really happening, or are we still sort of hungry to just get ahead, get that funding going, make those headlines, and phir dekhenge?
So the fact of life is we need money to grow our startup. That's the fact of life. It's the basic need on which everything else will rest. What has happened in last 1.5 years is that people have had chance to take a stock of the situation, what's happening. Weaker business models have tried to change themselves. People have just pivoted altogether. Money is always a requirement, and being optimistic about both money and the model and the bright side of the future is what a founder's core trait is.